My name is Kevin Loudon. I'm a product manager with Telestream on the Vantage encoder team. And today I'm going to be doing a presentation called But Can You Actually See the Captions? Which is probably a question that if you're dealing with captions on the web, you either ask or are asked many times. It's a part of the web streaming world that I think is still a bit in the Wild West, as we would call it in the United States, where there's sort of lots of things happening and things are still evolving in many ways. So I'm going to try and kind of go through some of the aspects of it to sort of make a little bit of sense out of the sort of the confusion, let's say. So some of the things I'm going to cover is, why caption or subtitle web content? Why do you need to do it? Bless you. Some of the key file formats and practicalities of captioning and subtitling, both from a sort of an input and an output perspective. As we go through this, you'll kind of see it's starting to evolve into a workflow or a pathway that's very similar to what we have to deal with video and audio for web content and captions. And sort of go through what you might need to think about and do if you're hosting your own content and your own website, and how do I solve this problem just for myself? And then also, how do I deal with it if somebody else is actually hosting my content? So I may have content, but I'm not actually doing the hosting. What are the things that I need to think about and be able to provide if a third party is doing the captioning for me or hosting it for me? And then I'll talk a little bit about the formats and things like that for both linear delivery and then also for adaptive bitrate. Because just like with linear formats, there's differences in what's required, and also with adaptive bit rates, there's multiple formats that are used, and they all have different requirements as well. So I'll sort of kind of go through that. And then repurposing broadcast content or having content that's original content for the web that was never broadcast. First the question is why? Why do we need to put captions on web content we've never had before? Well, in some cases it's the law. That's more of a bit of important for U.S. content. There's been a new legislation that's been put in that mandates that content that was broadcast with captions has to have captions. So I'm not aware of any actual laws or mandates outside of the United States that do require that, but I think there are. But beyond that, beyond it being forced to do it, some would say it's just the right thing to do, to give accessibility to the media content to people like, for the hearing impaired, certainly. But then also, as you can see from the last item, it broadens the reach of your content, and that's probably practically more applicable in a region like Europe or where there's lots of different languages in very close proximity, where you want to make your content available to an audience that is not in the native tongue of how the content was created. So in some cases you have to do it, but even if you don't have to, some would say it's just the right thing to do, even if you don't have to. And from a business perspective, you could call it, it broadens the audience for your content. So there is sort of a business motivation for doing it in a lot of cases, not only just a moral or legal motivation for doing it. So there's lots of reasons why. This is, in the US, there's the 21st Century Communication Act, but this is the new legislation that mandates in the US that any content that was or will be broadcast on air with captions, if you put it onto the web or mobile, it has to also be captioned. Content owners and broadcasters in the United States now You can see it's sort of starting now and ending in 2016 with various types of content where they're required to sort of stratifies, or there's several sort of sub-deadlines up until 2016 where any content that they do broadcast that has captions has to be captioned anywhere else that they display it. And we'll call it new media, web mobile. And like I said, I'm not aware of any legislation that's like this anywhere else, but I'm sure that there is in different countries. So there's a lot of complications that come with something like this, where they just sort of mandate that it does in my area, I'm not sure if they have it here, but at gas stations sort of near my house, there are gas pumps and there's a little video screen on the gas pump. So while you're filling your automobile with fuel, there's a screen and it may be showing news clips or weather or sports highlights or something like that. So according to the 21st Century Communication Act, if that content was broadcast originally with captions, captions need to be available to the viewer on the gas pump. So this is just sort of, I don't know, maybe to the absurd example of what these kind of things mean, and what are the practicalities of that? What format does that gas pump play? And how am I going to make subtitles available to that and make it so that the viewer can then perhaps have some choice on what they're going to view as far as captions or subtitles. So it can get quite complicated, as you can see from just sort of an example like that. But it is possible, and it can be done, and it is being done. This just as an example, there's a public broadcaster in the Pacific Northwest in the United States that has been putting captions on all of the web content that they've been producing for several years now, well before any kind of legislative mandate. This is, after saying how complicated it could be, I do want to say that it is possible and it can be done. And in fact, earlier than perhaps it was required of them to do that. So we get to the question, how do I put captions on IP delivered content? Well, as a lot of you are probably aware, there's lots of different video and audio formats and streaming protocols and progressive download protocols. In the same way, there's lots of different captioning protocols and methods. Usually it's done with a caption file. When I say caption file, it's a sidecar caption file. So you've got a video and audio package, and then you've got an associated package that contains the text content. And a variety of other ancillary data that could be also associated with that. It can also be embedded within the video, which is very similar, at least in the United States, to how captions are delivered on a broadcast perspective, where they're actually embedded or injected into the video stream and the ancillary data of the caption stream. Just because of where we're having this conversation, I just wanted to have a little bit of a disclaimer about captions and subtitles, because between in the U.S. Generally people refer to captions as the data that's displayed on screen to display what someone's saying or any other kind of sound information, a door knock. There's a sound of a rushing car that may be off screen or isn't being seen by someone speaking, to display that kind of information for the hearing impaired. So in the US, we would refer to that as captions. In the US, we would refer to Spanish text that's displayed over an English-speaking program where the sound and dialogue is English as a subtitle. What I've found is that in other areas, they're kind of interchangeable, where sort of everything is referred to as a subtitle, whether it's ancillary or information that is there for the hearing impaired, which may have information about not just dialogue, but just general sound information, helicopter, or something like that, as well as different languages that aren't being spoken on screen. So sometimes I'm in a conversation with someone who's, from a different area or country, and we're talking about captions and subtitles, and sometimes that language gets confusing. So I just wanted to make sure. I may talk about something as a subtitle or a caption, and you may know it as something else. So hopefully we can get through that gap. But I just wanted to, if you're having conversations with someone, especially internationally, you may be saying, well, I need caption information, and they may say, well, I don't know, I have subtitles. So sometimes there is that, especially with international distribution, you can get into those differences in nomenclature, I guess is the way to do it. Most web captioning or subtitling requires having the caption data in a sidecar file along with the video and audio packaging. So it's not, most of the time it's not embedded. In fact, there's really only one case for the web where it is embedded. But most of the time it's required to be in some kind of a sidecar file. There are actually many different formats and types of these sidecars. These are some of the most popular. There's the what they call the W3C-TT or time text file, or a DFXP. These are two sort of sidecar formats. And then there's the Web VTT and the SRT. The top two are really, well, actually, I have the TTML or the WC3 or the DFXP. These are sort of open standard. The first one, the TTML, is an open standard that's defined by the World Wide Web Consortium. They are both XML formats, so it's an XML formatted subtitle file. Both of them do have a very rich feature set, so there's a lot of data that's available in it for positioning and font style and font size and color and things like that. So there's a lot of capabilities within these formats for doing rich presentation of the information. But along with that, it can potentially be very complicated, especially when you need to translate between one format and another. But these are, I guess, some would say these are the new standards. This is sort of the type of thing that you're going to see going forward, which is more of these XML formatted type of captioning files. Now, the SRT or the Web VTT, these are native for the HTML5 video tag. So the players that can support that video tag, this is the type of file that it's going to be referenced. The SRT, and I think to some extent the iteration of the VTT, their origins are from this kind of open source tool called SubRip, which was an open source tool for ripping DVDs. It's still even widely used today. One of the most common ways of getting subtitle information for a piece of content that was going to be used on the web was to grab the DVD and then rip it, and one of the things that they would rip out of it would be those subtitles or captions that were created for the DVD production. It's still actually a very commonly used way of getting things, especially for international distribution, where they would just go and grab the language subtitles from that and then use that SRT file in conjunction with the video to display those captions. This is it's a text-based format, so it's pretty simple in its formatting, but it does lack that sort of more advanced functionality for font color positioning or anything like that. So it's much more simple, but it's sort of what people cobbled together before there were any kind of standards or anything like that for doing this. It was just, we needed to figure out something to do, so this was a way to do it. Because of that, there's a lot of this content, and there's a lot of workflows already in place for doing it. So it is a commonly requested captioning format from either a sort of a web development team in-house or from a CDN that may be hosting. So next, there's sort of two slides on what I would refer to as caption mezzanine formats. So in the United States, there's the SMPTE specification, SMPTE 2052, or a SMPTE time text file. And this is, it's what it came out of, again, this 21st Century Communication Act, where these broadcasters and content owners were mandated to provide this. So they worked with SMPTE to define this time text file, which is a specification to design, to define an interchange format for captions or subtitles. So that the idea is, just like you have a sort of a mezzanine video format that you would then use to create deliverable content. So if you need something for HLS or Adobe HDS, et cetera, or linear formats, you would have a mezzanine caption format in the United States. That would be this SMPTE 2052 file, which you could then use to create deliverable caption formats. So just like you have your master video and audio asset, you've got your master caption asset, and then as you need to distribute those to for distribution, you could then take that and translate it into something else that may be needed for the actual delivery platform. It is an XML-based format, and it's based on that W3C time text format that I was talking about earlier. It does include a way to tunnel or embed 608 captions. Again, that's more of a US thing, but you can take the 608 captions and put them into one of these XML form files, and then it can be extracted later for use for something else. Now, I say that's more of an American thing. In Europe, even for broadcasters, there's none that I am aware that embed the captions within the video stream. It's usually in some kind of, again, sidecar file format. Now, similar to the SMPTE TT, the EBU is proposing a similar type of format called the EBU time text, or EBU TT. And again, it's designed as an interchange format so that this can be used sort of as a universal handoff from either a broadcaster to a CDN, or just from one person to another, saying, here's my video and audio, here's this EBU TT. The idea is you use that to then make whatever you need for captioning from that. So again, like I said at the beginning, you start to see just how we've developed these video and audio workflows for repurposing and distribution. The idea is coming out and being worked into a more formal method of interchanging and transcoding, repurposing caption and subtitle information. Again, it is an XML based, and it's a subset of the TTML format. So any EBU TT is sort of a valid TTML, but not every TTML is a valid EBU TT. So it has very sort of strict a fence around it. So one can go to the other, but just because it's a TTML doesn't mean it's a valid EBU time text format. So again, the idea with this is I have some content. I want to give it to a partner to host, that is licensing it from me, wants to put it on the web. I can give them this, and the idea is I can give them this EBU time text format, and then depending on how they're streaming and delivering to the end user, they can then format that in the way that they need it. So now we're going to sort of talk about how do I actually do this? What are the things that I need in order to do this? So the first one we're going to talk about is how do I do it myself? I have a website that I put video on, and I now want to make captions available on my website, and whether it be large or small. Video could be the main component of the website, or it just could be a website where there happens to be video on it, and it's important to have captions or subtitles on it for corporate use, education use, etc., for example. Well, the thing that you do is you'd use a specific player. So most embedded players have capabilities for supporting captions and titles. And if we just go to the next, two of the most common players that you'll see embedded on sites are the JW player or the Flow player. JW will support WebVTT, sidecar files, SRT, and DFXP. So you can either get your captions formatted into that, or if you get them in some other way, you translate that into one of those formats. There are many tools, tools from Telestream being one of them, that are, let's say, historically or traditionally video translation or transcoding pieces of software that have developed caption and subtitle translation capabilities into them. There are also dedicated pieces of software that just do this. So they'll take caption information from one format and translate it into another. So you may already have some video transcoding software that can then do this in a supplemental pathway or a parallel pathway, or you may need to send it out to another piece of software. The product Mac Captions is a fantastic tool for doing that kind of thing, but there's many others. That's just a standalone caption-only translator.
What was this called?
Mac Captions. Yeah. The company is the company that makes it is I can't remember exactly. Mark, do you know who makes Mac Captions?
I thought I just seen a little shoe.
Yeah.
I'll find that for you.
Yeah, but if you just Google Mac Captions, you can find it. They make tools not only for actually creating captions, watching a piece of video and typing text in to make captions. They also do a lot of translation. There's a company called Screen that is very good for doing caption. I call it transcoding. It's not necessarily transcoding, transposition, maybe reformatting. And Vantage that we make at Telestream, we have a lot of integration with a lot of these tools that do that. Again, in parallel, we mainly deal with video and audio, but we have some capabilities for doing it, and a lot of it is through integration with other tools. Softronic. Thank you. So again, these are two players. They're both Flash players, by the way. Both JB player and the Flow player are Flash players. But of course, nowadays, Flash players can play more than just Flash video. But what they would be pointing at would be, this is the video, this is the audio, or they could be both embedded in the same file. And then, here is the DFXP file for this, and then being able to display that. And if you need multiple languages, generally it's multiple sidecar files. The capabilities of embedding multiple languages within these single files is still sort of evolving So a lot of times it's sort of, you've got multiples. There are some other options, and a lot of people, again, use them today. You can physically burn the subtitles into the picture. So these are actually overlaying pixels right on top of the picture. There are some benefits. You don't have to have special players. You don't have to deal about sidecar files and things like that. The downfall is, of course, it's burned into the picture. There's no choice. But you'll see a lot of, it is actually quite common where, you want it with subtitles or without, or you choose a specific language, and it's actually just pointing to a different physical file that has the things built in. There's some cool things going on with these graphical overlays. In fact, Softronic, the company I was just talking to, is working on some really cool stuff where they can take sort of a caption file and then generate graphics files for all of those things, and then through a special player, be able to overlay them in real time on playback. The cool thing about it is that they're very scalable. So if you're watching, well, nowadays we could be talking about 4K display and 2K display on down to small. They're rasterized in real time from vector graphics, so you get nice clean graphics overlaid. So there's some things kind of going on with that. And then, of course, there's always, make it somebody else's problem. Where, and again, this is a very common way of doing it. And basically, we go back to that mezzanine format. So you've got, here's my video and audio. It's sort of some kind of master or mezzanine format. Here is, I guess I'm talking about, this is sort of the way a lot of people would like to have it done. It's not necessarily done that way, where here's my SMPTE safe harbor file from the United States, or here's my EBU time text file along with my assets. And then you as the CDN or streaming or hosting provider or a web service, we'll call it Netflix or Hulu or something like that, they're going to do the translation into the format that they need. So like I said, in a sort of perfect world, this is what would be happening, where you'd be using these interchange formats, and I think that's what everybody wants to do. That the reality is it's been going on for a little while, and people have sort of ad hoc to their own specific workflows just to kind of get it working, and that's the way that they're in now. So in practice, they may be asking for an SRT, a web VTT, or some kind of other time text format, just because this is the way we've been doing it, and this is the way everybody would sort of like to do it, and this is the way that it's done now. So all we've been talking about now have been linear formats, linear flash formats, or QuickTime. QuickTime, by the way, if you're going to just use QuickTime Player on your website, QuickTime has a closed caption track, and there's a number of different ways, including Mac Captions, to get that content into a QuickTime file, but that's very specific to QuickTime only, and through a web player or through just a desktop player. But now you've got, I guess we can't really call it the new kid on the block anymore, but adaptive bitrate formats. And they have their own way of doing captions. Some of them are kind of the same, and some of them are a little different. So in case people aren't familiar with what adaptive bitrate is, these formats, they're designed for smooth playback with no buffering, or little or no buffering, we should say. In all of the cases, the video is encoded at multiple bit rates and multiple screen sizes, even frame rates. And they are hosted on the server side, and then the player can switch between these different renditions or bit rates as bandwidth needs are either being met or not being met. So if the bandwidth decreases, they can switch to a lower bitrate rendition. There's 4, I would say, popular adaptive bitrate formats. 3 of them are probably really in use. Again, there's sort of the way it's done and the way everybody wants to do it. So I would say the 3 that are in use, we've got Apple's HTTP live streaming or HLS format. So that's all of your iOS stuff. That's how you're going to deliver to those formats. The HLS specification has a way of doing embedded 608 captions. So that gets actually put into the video stream, embedded within the stream in the MPEG headers for captioning. Adobe's HDS uses a sidecar file. It's either a DXXP. Luckily, actually the bottom 2 use the same kind of sidecar format. So either Windows Media Smooth Streaming or Adobe HDS. I think both of them can actually support others, some other formats as well, but I know that those 2 will definitely work in their some of the more common subtitle file formats. And then MPEG-, again, this is sort of the top 3 are sort of the way it's done now, and what everybody would like, and what the promise of MPEG- is, it's sort of this one format that everybody will be able to play. It as a format and specification itself is evolving, and certainly the way that they do captions is evolving. So I can't really give you any solid information on how that works, because no one really knows just yet where that's going to happen, whether it's going to be embedded in the video streams in the chunks, or a sidecar, or it could be both. MPEG- is sort of being specified in a very broad, loose way, so it could be either of them could work. So if part of your deliverables is both ABR and linear, with Adobe Stream Streaming and HTTP, Microsoft Smooth Streaming, if you've got your sidecars, your DXFP, that sidecar format can be used for both of those adaptive bitrate formats. And as well as, if you remember back to the slides for Flow and JW Player, they also support that. So that one sidecar file can actually support most of your needs, and then you've got your 601. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to remark that I think that HLS also supports WebVTT right now, and especially from
You're right.
iOS 6.
Right.
So
You're correct.
And WebVTT is very close to SRT.
Yes. Yeah. So there you have your ABRs. So that, did I go backwards? I guess not. So again, how am I going to repurpose these things for the web? With video, you're going to transcode, right? So you've got a broadcast asset. You need to transcode it for however you're going to use it on web or mobile. Same goes for your captions. It's going to be in one format for broadcast. It's going to be another for your IP content. And you're going to need to, I call it transcoding, but it's really reformatting to one of these formats. I had a note right here on this slide. Now uses VTT. So there are some other challenges for repurposing caption content for the web. This is one that I actually learned when researching to do this presentation, is that's actually the rights to captions, especially if you are repurposing sort of legacy broadcast content. If you sent that content out to a service provider or a caption house to produce those for you, a lot of them work on licensed negotiations. So you may be licensed to broadcast that caption information, but may not have the web rights to it. So you may have to go and look at this content from a legal perspective to say, okay, well, this is something that I broadcast 5 years ago, and I now want to pull it into my catalog and make it available through some kind of web partner or through my whatever. And I need captions or subtitles. Well, you may only have the rights for broadcast for that, and you may need to go back to the caption house that produced that for you and relicense or renegotiate that contract for other uses of that caption content. So that's one that may not be obvious. It certainly wasn't obvious to me that is the case. But those are oftentimes licensed pieces of content, and just like with anything, licensed pieces of content for specific uses. So that's a consideration that you may need to go to if you're going to repurpose caption or subtitle information that was used for one purpose and now you want to use it for another, is the rights. The other one is editing or retiming. So you may have caption information that was created for a broadcast or a show, and now you're going to make it available through some other IP outlet, but you want to edit it. You want to edit it for time or for content or something like that. So you're going to actually take pieces out and retime things. Well, when you do that, caption information is always based on time, right? So it's either on a frame count or a time code count. I'm saying at this time code, display this text, or at this time code, display this text at this font and color in this position. Well, if you edit a chunk of time out of that, now the time reference that's in your subtitle or caption file is referencing something else. It's referencing a different moment in time. So when you are repurposing this content and it's changing in time in any way, you have to be sure that when you do your translation and reformatting, that it's capable of following the retimed content, and can get retimed as well. If you're dealing with embedded captions, again, this is more from a US-centric point of view, a lot of that caption and subtitle information is already embedded in the video stream. So when you cut it out and retime it, the only thing that I know that can actually do that properly from an editing perspective is an Avid. You cut it on anything else, and it's not going to be able to recover that timing information for the captioning. And then from a sidecar perspective, you can see the inherent dangers in that, because they're decoupled. You change the timing in this, the time references, you have to retime to that. There are some tools to do that, to re-reference the video frames and the video time code, and then have it look at the caption information and retime it. Or it has to be done manually, which is more often the case, that it has to be done manually. So just it's sort of some conclusions. Again, why do we do it? It's the law. It's the right thing to do. It allows you to sell your content into more areas perhaps than you could before because of language barriers. There's many ways to do it. Right now, there's lots of different ways. There's a lot of work being done to try and simplify and standardize the formats and workflows to do it, both with SMPTE time text and EBU time text. It usually involves some kind of reformatting because the way that the captions were originally used is more often than not different than the format needed for IP delivery. So almost always there is some kind of translation or transposition involved in getting it from one place to another. And with that, I'm done. I'm happy to answer any questions if I can. And thanks for sitting through with me.
A question, do you normally see this being used in video on demand applications or live or a combination of the two?
Most of the stuff that I'm talking about here is on demand, right? So with live, there's a whole different sort of bit of complication to it. I'm not terribly familiar with the live space in doing it. So, however, everything that I've talked about is I guess I should have said that at the head, is more towards prep and delivery of on-demand content,
Yeah.
where either captions are already existing or
And you attach
along.
them to existing video asset.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. With live, the transposition of it, I don't know of, again, the company that I work for doesn't really work in that space. So because of that, I'm not familiar with the technologies involved. I'm sure there are, surely there are.
They're full
Yeah.
time, they do exist.
Yeah, it's exactly as well.
Yeah.
BBC
Yeah, as with this, they are fraught with pain, which is a
Yes.
apt description of the process.
Currently a case going through with Ofcom at the minute where something got translated into a swear word that wasn't, and 9 people complained. And now the whole world's up in arms about the abuse of the system.
Yes.
So,
Mhm.
yeah.
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 So it's interesting.
Mhm.
So you think there will be a standard at some point in the future?
Well, like I said, they're trying.
Yeah.
They're brand new. I mean,
There has to be a standard.
Yeah.
I'd love there to be a standard.
you know,
We'll have SRT files and
I think that the
VTT
Why
files.
will there be a standard? It's not standard for anything else, there's lots of them.
Yeah.
I think we've had this with, this is
Yeah.
not new, we went through this with DVD,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
10, 15 years ago, and we came out with half a dozen standards.
Yeah.
So,
I think
My question goes a little bit into the direction because you mentioned 2 players. I mean, I know 15 more.
Right.
And in the moment, for instance, we deal a lot with DRMs in the moment, so we have to find the right format that the DRM player is playing the right captions. So
right,
it's always-
because they may have their own player.
They have to have their own player. That's
Right.
exactly the way, and it's the way which format they support.
Yeah,
So
and that's the slide. Make it their problem.
Exactly, but it's my problem. So
Right.
enjoy the slide a lot.
Well, and that's what the and that's what the hope of like the EBU TT and the SMPTE TT is supposed to solve, so that you have one sort of standardized interchange format that you can give to a CDN, or
But
and I use that word, I use that term broadly.
But
Um,
this was also a question for you as a telestream, as a transcoder vendor. Do you have tools integrated in your software that makes, if I deliver it to you one format and create several output formats, that the translation will be done within the software and I don't have to take care of it?
In some
Or
cases,
is it
yeah,
I have to provide a standard to you that you can
right.
do the integration of all the formats? How,
Yeah.
how does this?
We have some tools, again, but mostly we rely on partners like Screen or Softronic with Mac Captions to create that parallel workflow. So you can deliver, for example, into our Vantage software, a video and audio asset and a caption asset, and that translation will get done sort of in parallel.
So,
It may not be done all within the Vantage software, but it will be done within the control of the Vantage software. But the actual translation of the caption content might be done by a third party.
okay, so
Does that make sense?
I deliver a content asset to you, to your software, and I make it in one standard format, the teletext, the subtitles,
Mm-hmm.
or captions, or whatever.
Right.
And then I create a Flash asset as well as an HLS as well as a smooth asset. You will take care that the right subtitles will be in the formats, or do I have to do it by the third party to make sure that in the players?
Well, it would say in the perspective of the Vantage platform, I could say it would all be done by us. Whether, because you would deliver both of those things, interject those in the input side of Vantage, and on the back side, you'd get all of those with all that formatting done. In between, the operation may actually not get done by something that's manufactured by us. It could be integrated into us.
I know that
But-
you're working a lot with screen, but
Yeah.
not always solving all problems, so that's why I was
Well,
asking.
right,
And
yeah.
screen is also
Yeah.
well, very specific by itself.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds like some product development you can do for this guy.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Ah,
like I said,
you're
it's,
interested as well, huh? I see you
it's,
there.
it's sort of in a,
Well, we might think about it as well.
it's very much, it's behind where we are now with video and audio,
Yeah.
you know? So it's very much an evolving part of the process.
Yeah.
So yes, certainly, we are doing product development in that area. One, motivated domestically in the United States because it's the law. And I would say before that, most of the involvement that we had in that space was actually here because of languaging, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, where it was, there was more action and activity in the subtitling space here, you know, what I would call overseas, than there was in the United States. Now with the mandate, you know, it's sort of a big thing.
Well, we woke you up. Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
Europe wins again.
Just like with World War II. Took us a while.
Took the Japanese to read as World War II.
Right.
We have a lot of customers, we still have a lot of transcode and stuff, but we have a lot of customers who just like the second video stream with burnt in
Yeah.
captions because it's easy. It's not elegant, technically.
Right.
It's very elegant, but actually it works. And we've been able to, I mean, we work with Television and guys, and their derivations is we use in other areas, so we use the same tools effectively for, we have a customer that puts in sports highlights, and they dynamically overlay titles through the graphics engine with metadata coming in through XML. It achieves exactly the same sort of function, so they brand each clip with effectively a caption. And we've had some people who've used that same tool, write their own software to caption using a standard graphics engine rather than a specific subtitling engine. And that's okay for simple stuff. But I describe subtitling as a big bang of curve generally because if you understand subtitling, you know that there's more than just a few words.
Yeah.
You get involved in other languages, you get involved in Arabic, or you get involved with likes of left languages or Japanese, Hindi, and all these sort of things. It's horrible. It's really, really complicated. So, you know, America in general has had this really easy because another language in America that usually doesn't exist. If it does, it's probably Spanish.
Yeah.
What, the Miami?
Yeah, exactly. It won't be long before more people speak Spanish
Yeah.
and English.
It's the whole country now.
But it's,
It's the whole country.
whereas in the DVD world, I used to have customers who were regularly putting in 15 plus languages, and even in transmission, I've got customers who put in 30 language tracks in
Yeah.
transmission. So, I mean, we've been dealing with these problems for a lot longer, typically, in Europe.
Exactly.
And I found it, because it's funny how technology's come around, I'm dealing with the same problems I was dealing with 15 years ago in DVD. Reusing a lot of subtitle data is very difficult because quite often there was no attachment between the original asset video master because it's probably a sub version of
Yeah.
the international release or a localized version or a re-edited version and the subs that were done. And as you say, we see a lot of those subs were done at the time and licensed to that use of that material then. So actually most people just didn't even keep them because they didn't have the rights, didn't know what to attach
Yeah.
them to. People didn't have the systems to control where those subtitles ended up relative to the video asset.
Right.
So again, typically we've got a lot of customers who are just going, we'll redo it again and we'll burn it in, both of which are horrid solutions, but both of which
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot of this sort of like get it done, you know, ways, and that's why we have all these different ways, you know, ripping things off of DVDs and et cetera, and sort of the way that we want to have it happen, you know. So the EBUTT is supposed to kind of do what you want. You know, you have one sort of formatted thing, and you can give it to 10 different CDNs, and depending on what player, because they may have custom built their own player, they're going to translate it to whatever they need. But all the information that they need should be in that one interchange format.
I think for me the interesting question is, so where is, like, on the playback side, where is the standard going in there? I mean, what is on the HTML5 side, what are the options, what are browsers implementing, and how is this evolving? Because in the end, I mean, the intermediate formats are interesting and it's good as a transport thing, but in the end, you might even not need it anymore. And the playback side, there's a little bit more of less choice and a little bit. So how do you see that? Do you see any developments on that side?
I don't think there's ever going to be any unified way.
Of course not, but
You know, it's just the nature of competition. They're all going to have their own, you know, there's always going to probably be at least 3, you know, because there's Adobe, Apple, and Microsoft. So there's always going to be at least 3. You know,
That's the problem. We've
yeah.
got in broadcast, where you've got BBB subs and subtitle subs, and they're mandated at a very high level. And
Right.
they've been in the specs since the beginning.
Right.
And I suspect that this won't help us today. But now the US, you know, because a lot of this is US-centric, let's face it. Now the US have got an act that says you have to do it. I would say the next format to come out, the next iteration of this thing,
Yeah.
it will be in the conversation a lot earlier.
Yeah. See, even in the U.S., they made this, you know, safe harbor SMPTE 2052 time text format. That's really no one's using that on the end, you know. So no one's, you know, the CDNs and the people who are hosting the content, they're not using that yet, and I don't know if they ever will. They're taking it and they're translating it into whatever they need for their particular player. I guess the idea is that they could use it, but in the reality right now, they're not. They've had to, what I term hot rod, their own method of doing it to get it to happen in the fray of doing business. You know, they needed to have it done. There was no standardized way of doing it, so they figured out a way to make it work for them with their player, with their DRM, with their streaming solution. Going forward, yeah, I would hope that you know, more would be able to use the same format that's being used for distribution for end playout. And of course, that's always the ideal. You know, MXF was supposed to do that for us.
exactly.
We all see what happens there. You know, MPEG Dash is supposed to do that for you know. It's supposed to be the one adaptive format that everybody can use. I think that just the nature of business is there is always going to be these differences. The hope is to try and get them down to some kind of controllable minimum. Where right now with captioning and subtitling, there isn't. It's really this a bag of hurt. But it is starting to narrow down to fewer and fewer disparate formats and files and things like that you need to have. You know, and these new interchange formats hold the promise of at least helping with that and getting that down to a more manageable level, at least from the content owner, you know, sort of at a mezzanine level, to get that to end distribution outlets. Thanks everybody for sitting through what is normally just kind of a boring type of subject, subtitling and captioning.
Everybody would understand that would be boring, but nobody understands this world, so this is what it has to be. It's going through to the broadcasters as well
Yes.
to the telco people who wants to have that. So
Yeah. Thank you.
very